Today, we're answering a great question. I'm so glad so many people asked this question because I know whether you verbalize it or not, every one of you have asked this question at one time or another, and it's a very simple question. Where's God when I need Him? Where's God when I need Him? We all need God at some point in our life, and sometimes He shows up when you ask, and sometimes He seems absent. Where's God? We all need people. We know that. We need people, and so we always ask, where's the person I need when I need them? I was without my family for 2 weeks. They got back earlier this week, and many times over the 14 days when Tammy was gone, I said, where's Tammy? Because I needed help. I couldn't find the ice cream. I couldn't find the chips. I needed some clean clothes. Where's Tammy? Where's Josiah? Where's Caden? I need my feet rubbed. I need someone to feed me some grapes. I need someone to make my bed. I don't do that very often. Kids, you've started school. Mom, where are you? I need help with homework. The video game system's not working. Dad, where are you? I need help. We all need help. Friday, I was driving down Piney Forest. I saw a guy weaving in and out of traffic and ran 2 red lights. I said, police, where are you? Someone stop this guy. He's going to kill somebody. I was at Walmart the other day, and there was a guy there with more than 12 items in the 12-item arrest line. Check out police. Where are you? Stop the insanity. The question is this. What are you going to do when you call on God and He doesn't show up? What are you going to do when you say, God, I need you? God, I'm crying out to you. What are you going to do when God seems silent? You're not the only one who's ever asked this question. This question's been around since the beginning of time. Think about some of the people in the early scriptures. Think about Joseph. God gave Joseph a promise through a dream, and the next thing Joseph knows, his brothers throw him into a pit. God, where are you? I'm in a pit. Help me. Someone get me out of here. And then Joseph is living a life of integrity, a life of purity, and then someone accuses him of doing something he didn't do, so now he's thrown into prison. God, where are you? David, a man after God's own heart, is told he's going to be the next king of Israel, and the current king of Israel, Saul, is trying to kill him, so now David is hiding in a cave. God, where are you? I'm in a cave hiding, fearing for my life. Moses is trying to get the people out of Egypt, out of slavery, out of bondage, and take them into a promised land. Take them into a land of freedom. Take them into a land that has everything they need for life. And behind them are the Egyptians trying to capture them and kill them. And in front of them, all he sees is the Red Sea. God, where are you? Mary, Martha, Lazarus. Lazarus is about to die. Their brother is on his deathbed. And Mary and Martha say, Jesus, come and help your friend. And Jesus shows up 4 days later. And Mary and Martha say, Jesus, my brother would have been alive if you just would have showed up. Where were you? Why didn't you come? All throughout Scripture. The question is not if you're going to ask this question. The question is when you ask this question, what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you cry out to God and God doesn't show up? I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life where God has seemed very distant. He seemed as if He has vacated my home. He's vacated my world. He's vacated my emotions. And then there are other times where God's everywhere. Everywhere I look, I see the presence and I see the hand of God. I don't know if any of you are like me, but the church I grew up in, I went to summer church camp a lot during the summer, and God was everywhere at summer church camp. And at the end of the camp, we would stand around a campfire, and we would hold hands, and we would throw a stick in the fire, and we would sing Friends Are Friends Forever by Michael W. Smith. And God was everywhere. God was everywhere. And then we go back home, and we go back to school. Where's God now? Where's God? God's distant. I can't find Him. Listen, if you were God, you know what you would do for you right now, wouldn't you? So how come God ain't doing that? God's smarter than I am. Doesn't He know what I need? Doesn't He know what I'm going through? Doesn't He know what I'm dealing with? And so if you have your Bibles in Mark chapter 5, we want to look at a story today that's very powerful. In Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 21. And as you look there, understand this. From the time in Genesis 1:1 when God said, "Let there be light," God made a promise to his people. God made a promise to his people. And he said, one day I'm going to send you a Messiah. I'm going to send you a deliverer. I'm going to send you salvation. I'm going to send you what you need one day. And all throughout the Old Testament, he kept making the promise, a Messiah is coming. But all throughout the Old Testament, the Messiah never came. In fact, when the Old Testament ended in the book of Malachi, and when the Old Testament ended, there then was 400 years of silence. What do you do when God is silent? When God's not there? And then in Matthew 1, when Jesus shows up on the scene, Jesus is born, and he lives this perfect, sinless life. And then he goes to the cross for the sins of the world. He takes your sins and my sins on his shoulders, and he's beaten and he's crucified and he dies on the cross, and then he's buried and he's put in that grave, and then he rises from the grave and he lives on earth for 40 more days, and he appears to more than 500 people. And right when he leaves, he says, "I'm leaving, but this is a good thing because I'm coming back." Amen. But here's the problem. That promise was made more than 2,000 years ago. So there was 400 years of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then Jesus made a promise, say, "I'm coming back," and now it's been more than 2,000 years. Maybe what you're waiting for ain't so bad after all. What do you do in the middle of your waiting? What do you do in your times of pain? What do you do in your times of confusion, your times of frustration, your times of loss, your times of loneliness? Where's God? God, why aren't you there? God, don't you care? God, why did this happen? God, why didn't this happen? What are you going to do when God seems silent? In fact, if you're taking notes, I want you to write this statement down. Statement by a great pastor, great theologian named Charles Spurgeon. He says this. He says, "To trust God in the light is nothing, but to trust him in the dark, that takes faith." To trust God when you don't know where God is. To trust God when he's silent. To trust God when your world is crashing apart. To trust God when your spirit is crushed and broken. Every one of us in this room has most likely at one time or another in our life cried out to God, and God didn't show up how you wanted or when you wanted. And so what did you do? Today's story is one of my favorite stories in Scripture. Let's get into it. Matthew 5, starting in verse 21, look what it says. It says, "Jesus got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him, 'My little daughter is dying. Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live.' Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him." So Jairus is a local synagogue leader, a church leader. His little daughter is dying. He hears that Jesus is coming through his town. So as he sees Jesus coming through his town, he goes and falls at his feet and says, "Jesus, I need you. My life is falling apart and my daughter is dying." Jesus sees his heart. Jesus knows his mind is on the right motives, the right thought. His mind is on his daughter. His mind is on something bigger than himself. He sees it. He feels it. And so Jesus gives this guy hope. And he starts to walk on the road with Jairus to his house. And sometimes, many of you, you've been given lots of hope. And you thought, this is the time it's going to turn around. Now I'm getting the answer to my prayer. And so as Jairus and Jesus begin to walk towards his house, we get verse 25, and look what it says. It says, "A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding." So here's what happens. Jairus begins to get hope. Jairus gets his, "Where's God? There's God. God's right there with me. Jesus is showing up. Jesus is going to come to my house. Jesus is going to hear my prayer. Jesus knows my need. Jesus is going to give me the miracle I've been praying for." And then he's interrupted. And now, if you read this story, here's what happens. This woman, she had been suffering from a fatal blood condition. And all she did, listen, she didn't do what Jairus did. She never even made her way all the way through the crowd. The crowd did not part like the Red Sea for Jairus, because Jairus was a local synagogue leader. The woman was basically crawling through the crowd, and all she wanted to do was touch the garment, to touch the robe of Jesus. She knew if she could just reach through the crowd, reach through the legs, reach behind the people, and just touch his very clothes, she knew that if she just touched it, the power of Jesus would flow through him and heal her body. Now, you got to understand, Jesus is at the height of his popularity. Jesus had never been more popular. Everybody's watching Jesus. All the news reporters are there. They're taking the story. What's he going to do next? What's he going to say next? Where's the next miracle coming from? The paparazzi's all over him. They're taking pictures. He had tons of fanatics, but he had very few followers. And they want to know what was going to happen next. And so he is surrounded by hundreds and thousands of people. And when this woman touches the garment of his robe, he stops in his track. And he says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, "What do you mean, who touched you? Look at all these people around you. Hundreds of people are touching you. Everybody's touching you." And he says, "No." And he says to his disciples, "Power just left me." Because he knows someone touched him, but someone touched him by faith, by believing that something was going to happen. And so she touched him, and Jesus stopped everything. And he spent time with this woman. Jairus is standing there. Jairus is excited. Jairus is hope-filled. And Jairus is watching Jesus take time for this woman. Jesus didn't push her aside. Jesus didn't say, "I'll come back to you. I've got something more important." Jesus allowed his life to be interrupted so a miracle could take place. And look what it says in verse 34. In verse 34, it says this. He says to her, he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." This woman who desperately touched the garment of Jesus received her miracle, and her suffering ended. Powerful story. But Jairus is still standing there. Where's God when I need him? Look what it says in verse 35. While he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher right now." Some of you have stopped troubling the teacher. Some of you, you've been holding out for hope. There's something going on in your life. I don't know what it is. You know what it is, and God knows what it is. And you've bought into the lie. Why bother the teacher anymore? Why trouble Jesus with this prayer? Why trouble Jesus with this issue? It's never going to change. It's never going to be any different than how it is right now. And you've stopped troubling the teacher because you've bought into the lies of what other people have said. And I love Jesus' reaction when he hears this in verse 36. But Jesus overheard what they said, and he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid. Just have faith." Just have faith. Then Jesus stopped the crowd and would not let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and he asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep." The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and 3 of his disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Some of you have given up. God didn't show up, so you gave up. And I want to tell you in the next few minutes, God wants to overwhelm you and totally amaze you with his power and with his love. He wants you to see him in a way that you've never seen him before. There's so much in this story. One of the points is this. This is a story that I read when I was in college that called me into student ministry because it showed me how much Jesus loved middle school students, a 12-year-old. Don't you ever think Jesus doesn't care about the next generation and that they can't make a difference today. But let me give you 4 simple thoughts today on what do you do when God seems absent? What do you do when God doesn't show up how you want or when you want? I don't know what miracle you seek. I don't know what it is you're crying out for God. I don't know where it is in your life you've given up on God. But let me give you 4 simple thoughts on what you do with where's God when I need him. Number 1 is this. You got to keep on pleading to God. You got to keep on pleading to God. Jairus fell at the feet of Jesus and he pleaded fervently, my daughter is dying. Can you do anything about it? Parents, we know what it's like to plead, don't we? Because we see it all the time from our kids. Kids plead all the time. I want that toy. Give me that toy. If you go to Walmart today, you will see kids pleading with their parents for toys. Go to the toy out this afternoon. I want that toy. I want that toy. I want that toy. They cry and they can't get the words out. I'll never forget, years ago, we were living in North Carolina, and Tammy was at a women's event, and Josiah and Caden were so young. And it's me and the two boys, and I'm feeding them dinner, and it's macaroni and cheese, and I can't stand macaroni and cheese. That's a me issue, not a you issue. And I'm feeding them, and macaroni and cheese is going everywhere. It's a disaster of a dinner. The boys are crying. The boys are whining. The boys are fighting. And I don't know what to do, so I start giving them fruit snacks, because I just want them to be quiet, and I know they like fruit snacks. So I gave them each a pack of fruit snacks, and it shut them up. I was very happy. And they were happy. They were getting along. Meal was good. They were eating fruit snacks. They ate a bag of fruit snacks each, and after they got done, they said, fruit snacks, fruit snacks, fruit snacks. So I said, sure, here's another bag of fruit snacks. So after the second bag of fruit snacks, and maybe I shouldn't give them any more, but they said, fruit snacks, fruit snacks, fruit snacks, fruit snacks. So I gave them another bag of fruit snacks. I did this 4 times. They were pleading, they were begging, they were wearing me out. I gave them 4 bags. After the 4th bag, they said, fruit snacks, fruit snacks, fruit. I said, no, I'm cutting you off. I said, I'm cutting, you've had too much. You've had your limit. And then they said, we want mommy, we want mommy, we want mommy. I said, I want mommy, I want mommy. It hit me. They didn't really want mommy. They wanted what they thought mommy would give them, more fruit snacks. They were pleading for something that made them happy and temporarily satisfied. You know why Jesus met Jairus at his point of need? Because Jairus pleaded with God for something that was miraculous. Jairus pleaded with God for something that was beyond himself, that would not make him happy or temporarily satisfied, but that could impact all eternity. I want you to save my daughter because there's no telling what she could do for you. What are you pleading for? You know what? He pleaded fervently. He did not give up. That means continuous. That means with zeal. That means with passion. That means I will continue and I will persist and I will persevere until you hear me, Jesus. Pleading. We know what pleading, another word for pleading is the word desperate. Another word for pleading is the word desperate. When was the last time you were desperate for something? This past week, I went running on the Riverwalk, and I was desperate for water because I had run out of water. I was desperate. When was the last time you were desperate, really desperate? Years ago, we went on a mission trip to Russia, and in Moscow, you're in Russia, and if you love Russian food, God bless you. Praise God for you. But for me, it's the worst food I've ever seen in my life. And for a week, I didn't eat a meal all week. I ate peanut butter crackers and Pop-Tarts that I brought with me. And then one of our leaders had to go into Moscow an hour away to pick up one of our members who came 2 days late. And he brought back like 100 McDonald's hamburgers. You've never seen 16 high school students and one leader eat hamburgers faster than McDonald's on that day because I was desperate for food that was edible. Desperate. On that same trip, we had groups from Florida, Georgia, Texas, and Kentucky, and we're there teaching Russians English. And we had 250 Russian teenagers there, and we're teaching them English. And at the end of the story, the English story we're teaching them would share the gospel with them. The first day there, I'm throwing Frisbee with 3 or 4 of them, and we're having a good time. After about 3 or 4 minutes, I start talking to them the best way I know how because they know very little English. I say, you throw good. Good throw you. You throw good. Think they'll understand me. And after about another minute or 2, I said, where are you from? Where from you? And all 3 of them looked at me, and in unison they said, we from Kentucky. I was desperate to hide and never see those guys again for the rest of the week. It didn't work. I was embarrassed. Desperate. Has there ever been a time in your life when you were desperate? for God. Paul wrote more than half the New Testament. Paul says in Philippians 3, I want to know Christ and the mighty power that raised him from the dead. David, a man after God's own heart, says in Psalm 42, verses 1 and 2, he says, as the deer longs for the streams of water, so I long for you, O God. I thirst for God, the living God. When can I go and stand before him? I thirst for God. He goes on to say in Psalm 73, he says, whom have I in heaven but you? I desire you more than anything on earth. I desire you more than anything on earth. Do you truly desire God? Pleading fervently, desperately. What's your prayer? What's your need? For those of you who know anything about college basketball, they have a term in college basketball called one and done. And here's what that means. That means a student will go to college for 1 year, and they're so good in basketball, they leave school after 1 year and they go straight to the NBA. They're one and they're done, and then they go on to the NBA. They're one, they're done, NBA. I believe that many people, we've given God one and done prayers. I was once, I did it, God didn't answer it when I wanted, how I wanted, so now I'm done with it and I'll move on. And you've stopped pleading fervently. You've stopped being persistent in your prayers with God. I'm just asking you today, have you given up on the prayer of your heart because you know it's God's heart? Are you pleading for something that is beyond yourself? The prayers that go unanswered most often are the prayers that go unasked. And Jairus never gave up. What do you do when God seems absent? You don't stop pleading. Jesus saw Jairus' heart. He had the right motives and he had the right mind. Number two, you got to celebrate the miracles of others. What do you do when God doesn't show up how you want or when you want? You celebrate the miracles of others. Jairus was standing there in the circle when the woman got her miracle. My boys, when they were in California over these past few weeks, they learned to play a new video game that their cousins were teaching them. And it was a video game that my oldest boy thought he would naturally be better at because he's older, he's more mature, he knows how to play this game better. And my 12-year-old, first time they learned how to play this game, my 12-year-old beat him. He's not 12 yet, he'll be 12 next week. And so Caden beat Josiah in this video game. And Josiah... he was actually encouraging, from what I understand. He said, Caden, that is so good that you beat me. You picked up on this game. That's really nice. I'm really proud of you. Until Caden beat him for the 9th time. And then it wasn't so encouraging. And then it's like, Caden, stop beating me. You're not supposed to be this good. I'm supposed to be better than you. Some of us, there was a time when we would rejoice when other people got their miracle. But we keep seeing it over and over and over and over. And now we're like, it's my turn. It's my turn. When is God going to answer my prayer? When is God going to show up on my behalf? Remember, Jairus is standing there. And Jesus stops everything he's doing. And Jesus spends time with this woman who's had a serious blood condition for 12 years. And Jairus, what doesn't he do? Jairus doesn't complain. Jairus doesn't cuss. Jairus doesn't argue with Jesus. Jairus doesn't throw around his position. Jairus doesn't say, hey, Jesus, don't you know who I am? I'm a leader in the synagogue. Come and help me. This woman can wait. Jairus doesn't do any of that. Jairus stands there patiently watching Jesus heal this woman, give her miracle while his daughter is on his deathbed. And you never see Jairus get upset. You never see Jairus argue. You never see Jairus walk off in a huff and a puff with his arms crossed and turning his back on Jesus and saying, I'm not following with Jesus anymore. You're gonna spend time with her? You're going to spend time with her? I've had it. He doesn't walk off. He doesn't say, I'm done with that place. I'm done with that man. And he stands there and he allows Jesus to bring this miracle that this woman had been waiting for a dozen years. And think about this. I didn't think about that till this week. This woman had been suffering from a blood condition for 12 years, and Jairus' daughter was 12 years old. For as long as this girl's been alive, she's been suffering. And she finally got her miracle. To celebrate the miracles of others. Folks, you are not competing against others for who can get God's miracle first. You're not competing against others. And some of us, we get so caught up in this way of thinking that I'm missing something in life. I'm missing something. And what happens is, for many of us in this room, we get so consumed with looking at what's missing from our life that we completely miss what God has already brought to our life. We completely miss what God's already done for us. We completely miss the love and the power and the grace and the forgiveness of God. One of my favorite verses is Romans 5:8. It says, "But God showed His great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners." That is a miracle. You've already received a miracle. You received the love, the grace, the forgiveness of Jesus. And you're missing the greatness and the power of God because you're critical of what everybody else is getting. You're questioning the actions of Jesus. Jesus, how could you do that for them? Jesus, how could that person get that? Psalm 23:6 says, "Surely goodness and mercy, surely goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever." That's a miracle. You know how bad you are. You know how bad you are, and yet His goodness and unfailing love continues to pursue you. That's a miracle. And you're so caught up, you're so consumed in being critical and negative of what other people are getting that you've completely missed what God's already done for you. What do you do when God seems absent? Are you able to celebrate what God's doing? And think about it this way. If God did that for them, imagine what He could do for you. Imagine what He could do for you. I've shared this with you before. There's a statement I read years ago, and it said 10 rules for curing your blues. 10 rules for curing your blues. Step number 1, do something nice for someone else. Steps 2 through 10, repeat step number 1. When you, listen, you know what one of the characteristics of spiritual maturity is? For those of you who have been in church for a long time, one of the biggest characteristics of spiritual maturity is when you're able to move beyond yourself. And listen to me. How you respond to someone else's miracle can open or close the door to your own miracle. And Jairus was very open and very responsive to what Jesus wanted to do. He did not question the actions or the judgments of Jesus. And yet, how often do we do that? When God seems absent, are you going to keep on pleading? Are you one and done? Do you have the right heart and the right motive for what you're asking for? Are you going to be negative of what God is doing for others? Or are you going to celebrate the miracles that He's doing for others and the miracle He's already brought your own life? Number 3, I love this one. What do you do when God doesn't show up? Number 3, you have to remember, it's never how it looks. It's not how it looks. In Mark 5, verse 39, listen to this verse again. Jesus went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, she's only asleep." The child's not dead, she's only asleep. When it comes to Jesus, folks, it's never how it looks. It's never how it looks. It's never as bad as it looks. Jesus always sees what we cannot see. Jesus sees further than what we see. Jesus sees bigger than what we see. Jesus is over us. He has the whole landscape in mind. All we can see is what's right in front of us. It's never as bad as it looks. Parents, you've ever had teenagers in your house, guys or girls, and they come to you and they start screaming and they're like, "Ah, my life is ending." And you're like, "Why?" "I found a pimple." And they got a pimple or they got acne on their face. "Ah, help me, I'm never going to school again." And you got to calm them down. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. I was listening to a comedian one time, and he was talking about his daughter who always has an overuse of words, overuse of phrases. And one of the phrases that this comedian's daughter says is, oh, that's the worst. That's the worst. And he was using it as an illustration, saying that he dropped his daughter off at the mall, and she was going to meet some friends there, and they were going to go shopping. And so they dropped her off at the mall, and when they got there, her friends weren't there yet. And she's like, oh, this is the worst. I'm going to be here all by myself. I can't be here by myself, Dad. This is just the worst. And he's like, oh, sweetie, you are so right. This is the worst. Yes, this is worse than being stuck in the mountains in a snowstorm. This is worse than being lost at sea surrounded by sharks. He said, sweetie, this is worse than being stuck in a mine with no air, no water, no food, and you don't know if you're going to live another day. This is just the worst. He did that as a comedy routine, but also to remind her it's never as bad as it looks. Never as bad as it looks. Football is starting up. High school football is starting up. College football, pro football is just around the corner. Preseason right now. And in some of those plays, quarterback will go back, he'll make a play, he'll throw the ball, and the wide receiver will catch the ball. And they won't know if the wide receiver who caught the ball got his feet inbounds or out of bounds. So the referee will make a play. He'll make a call. But if they're not sure if the call is right or not, they'll say, we need to take a closer look. We need to have further review. So they go and they review the play in super slow-mo. And they watch it from a bunch of different angles. And they look at it very closely. And then after about 90 seconds, they come back on the field and they say, after a closer look, upon further review, and they say the call is overturned or the call stands. But they take a closer look. You know what Jesus is saying here to some of us in here today? You need to take a closer look. Whatever situation you're going through right now, it's not as bad as it looks if Jesus is walking towards your house. And Jesus was with Jairus. Jesus was walking with Jairus, and Jairus was reminded it's never as bad as it looks. I need to take a closer look. You had to see a picture and you didn't know what it was because all you saw is a bunch of dots, and then you get a little bit further back and then the picture becomes into more focus. And you got to get a better perspective. You got to get a different perspective. Psalm 23:4 says it this way, even when I walk through the darkest valleys of life, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Get a closer look. Don't you forget who's walking with you, who's on the road with you, who's on your house, who's walking towards your house with you. Take a closer look. Even though you walk through the darkest valleys, I don't know what's going on right now, but take a closer look. Your marriage, it's not over. Your kids, it doesn't matter how far off they've gone. Jesus can bring them back. Take a closer look at who's walking with you and who is standing in your house. And Jesus says, let's go into the room where the daughter is. And some of you have said it's over. Some of you have said it's hopeless. And you've forgotten the words of Jesus himself in Matthew 19:26, where Jesus looked at them. He looked at the crowd intently, and he said, humanly speaking, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. All things are possible. One of my favorite quotes by one of my favorite writers named Mark Batterson says this. He says, don't put a period where God puts a comma. And some of you have put a period on your life and God just says, nope, that's just one part of your life. That's just one part of your life. It's not over. And so you got to take a closer look. It's never how it looks if Jesus is on the scene. And so some of you, because Jesus didn't show up when you wanted or how you wanted, you said it's over. And it's never how it looks. Don't you forget who's standing right beside you. Don't you forget if you are a Christ follower. If you are a Christ follower, don't you forget who's standing in your house with you. And the fourth and final thing is this. You have to ignore the doubters. You have to ignore the doubters. If there was a book called 1,000,001 Bad Ideas, and some of y'all, how many of y'all ever made a bad decision? Raise your hand. Come on, everybody raise your hand if you're over the age of 1. We make bad choices. If there was a book called 1,000,001 Bad Ideas, you know what should be number 1 in that book? Number 1 is this: laugh at Jesus. That's a bad idea. That's a dumb idea. Listen, we saw in Genesis, Abraham and Sarah laughed at Jesus. Bad idea. And now we've got a crowd laughing at Jesus because Jesus says, she's not dead, she's only asleep. And look what it says in verse 40 and starting. In verse 40, the crowd laughed at Jesus. Bad idea. And then the crowd and the commotion and the weeping, but he made them all leave. And he took the girl's father and mother by the hand and the 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. And he said, little girl, get up. But if you go back to verse 35 and 36. Verse 35 and 36. They come to Jairus and they say, your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now. No use troubling the teacher. He doesn't have time for you. He's going to move on to more important stuff. And what does Jesus say in verse 36? He says, Jairus, don't you be afraid. Just you have faith. And it's a real simple question. Right now, in your difficulty, in your confusion, in your frustration, in your loss, in your loneliness, in the times when you feel abandoned, in the times where you feel like God's not doing what he's supposed to be doing for me, who are you going to listen to? Jairus had to ignore the naysayers. He had to ignore the commotion. He had to ignore the crowd, and he had to focus on his Christ. Jairus had to ignore those who were laughing at Jesus, and he had to listen to the voice of Jesus. He had to ignore the voice of the crowd. Jesus is the voice of truth. You have an enemy. We said last week, what did we say last week for those of you that were here? People are not your enemy, but the enemy uses people to attack us. You know what the enemy does? The enemy uses people to distract us, to take us off our purpose, to take us off our focus. Don't allow the voice of the deceiver to be louder than the voice of truth. And Jesus is saying to you today, just have faith. Just plead a little bit more. Don't give up. Celebrate. Praise me for what I've already done. Don't you forget that. Don't you forget I went to the cross for you. I loved you. I saw you when you were at your worst. I saw you when you gave up. And guess what? My goodness and my unfailing love, it still pursues you. It still pursues you. Some of us today, we're just listening to the wrong voices. We're getting so distracted. Are you listening to the voices of those who think they know it all? Or are you listening to the voices of the people who actually know it, know the one who knows it all? Who are you going to listen to? Who are you going to listen to today? The question is, where's God? That's the question. Where's God? God hasn't gone anywhere. He's right where he's always been. He's right by your side. And he wants to walk with you on the path to your house. He wants to be invited to your home. He wants to tell you. He wants to tell your marriage, rise up, get up, live, walk. What dream, what hope are you living for today? Is it your dream, your hope, your plans, or is it the plans that God has for you? On Friday and Saturday of this week, maybe you saw the stuff going on around town, but there was a rodeo. Yeah, this is my rodeo rope. It's a really cool rope. I don't know if any of you went to the rodeo, but when I was in college, I worked at a summer camp up in Maryland called River Valley Ranch. And every Saturday, our camp hosted a real professional rodeo. We had it all. I mean, real cowboys with the bucking bull, with the bulls, with the bucking horses, with the trick riders, with rider pickup, where someone rides a horse real fast and spins around a barrel and picks someone up, and they get on the back of the horse and they ride back of who can do that the fastest. I did that one time in my life. There's a reason why I only did it one time in my life. Won't go into that story. But when that cowboy gets on the bull and has the rope there and gets their hand right underneath there, and they've got the glove and they get it right underneath there, and they've got that bull, and then they open the gate and the bull comes out, and the bull is bucking and kicking its back legs, and the cowboy is sitting right there, got the hand over the head of the bull, trying to stay on it for 8 seconds. And when that bull finally eventually kicks that cowboy off, the rope goes flying in the air. The cowboy runs and climbs up the gate to get away from the bull. Now, we had a crowd of about 700 people that would come out every Saturday. But we also had real clowns at the rodeo. The clown was dressed in a way that would catch the bull's attention. The clown even knew the words that the bull would hear, even above the mass noise of the crowd and the commotion. And the crowd would get the attention of that bull and would go up to the bull and guide the bull right back into the gate so the bull could go on the path the bull was meant to go on. And the question is real simple today. There is a gate that you're supposed to walk through. There is a path that God designed for you to walk on. And He wants to be your guide. He wants to grab the reins of your rope and pull you right back in line with His plan for your life. But what happens is this. If that bull gets distracted and starts listening to all the noise of the crowd, all the people in the stands, that bull will do some very dangerous things that will put its life and the life of others at risk. Thank God for that clown. If you keep listening to the wrong voices long enough, you're going to put your life and the life of others at risk. And Jesus says, I know the way to go. I know your life is hard right now. I know it seems like I haven't showed up when you need me. I know what you're struggling with. I know where you're questioning me. I know where you're doubting. I know where you've given up. But I'm asking you, come and fall at my feet one more time. Come and fall at my feet. Come and celebrate what I've already done. Come and remember, I see something that you can't see yet. And come and remember, I want to whisper in your ear, I'm the voice of truth. And I have something so much greater planned for you than you could ever imagine. Would you pray with me?